I've come to sit at your feet, to drink from the fountain of life, how it satisfies. Nowhere else do I want to be. The warmth of your heart is enough, it's enough for me, yeah. I've come to have communion with the King, to sit at the table and dine with the highest priest. Oh, to know just what's on your mind, the secrets of heaven I'll live to search, to find. So hide me deep inside your heart, Lord, cover me with your wings, lead me into safety, lead me into fellowship with who you are, Lord, Father, Son, and Spirit. This is all I long for. I've come to sit at your feet, to drink from the fountain of life, how it satisfies. Nowhere else do I want to be. The warmth of your heart is enough, it's enough for me, yeah. So hide me deep inside your heart, Lord, cover me with your wings, lead me into safety, lead me into fellowship with who you are, Lord, Father, Son, and Spirit. This is all I long for, to be in your midst, to be in your midst. Oh. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known by you, Jesus. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known by you, Jesus. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known by you, Jesus. This my heart's desire, to know you and be known, to know you and be known. So hide me deep inside your heart, Lord, cover me with your wings, lead me into safety, lead me into fellowship with who you are, Lord, Father, Son, and Spirit. This is all I long for. So hide me deep inside your heart, Lord, cover me with your wings, lead me into safety, lead me into fellowship with who you are, Lord, Father, Son, and Spirit. This is all I long for. So hide me deep inside your heart, Lord, Father, Son, and Spirit, this is all I long for, to be in your midst.
Hey Oak Life, my name is Lilia and I'll be sharing announcements with you today. Well, first I wanted to say I miss you guys, and I miss being at the new parkway and, not having my makeshift workstation behind me. And actually, this is a cool drawing. This is from my niece. She drew it on printer paper and I enlarged it and then printed it. And I need to frame it. It's called Crocodile Witch. I don't know if you can tell. It's pretty neat drawing. She was like 5 or something. So kids are strange, but they're cool. All right. Okay. So as for the formal announcements, it's a strange time, right? And it's highlighted by all the different things that we've had to do to keep connected to each other, including our services online. And we know that it affects people differently. So if you need support, please reach out to leadership at oaklifechurch.com. We've organized some mental health resources, and just want you to know that you are not alone. If you are in a difficult financial situation because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we invite you to reach out to benevolence at oaklifechurch.com and reach out and describe your situation, and we can see in what way we can be of most aid to you. If you'd like to donate to our benevolence fund, and by the way, thank you to everybody who has continued their generosity for Oak Life Church and our benevolence fund, you can go to oaklifechurch.com/generosity, and you should see some prompts there that will lead you to determine whether you're donating to our general fund or the benevolence fund. Also join us for coffee hour on Sundays. So next Sunday at 9 a.m., different people will be coming together to meet in a more interactive and video format on Google Meet. And that link is private and is generated, uniquely generated each week. So reach out to Chris at oaklifechurch.com to receive that link and that invitation for coffee hour on Sundays at 9 before 10 a.m. service. We've also been participating in Wednesday prayers at noon. So this isn't like a meeting or anything online or virtual. It's just, kind of a group activity that we do individually, but we do it all at the same time, Wednesdays at noon, where we lift up prayer for our world and for our community and our loved ones, and maybe even take an opportunity to be mindful of the challenges that lie before us, and maybe our strengths and all the things that we have to be grateful for at the same time. So know that there are some of us partaking in this activity. So if you feel so inclined, do set your alarm for a reminder for Wednesdays at noon to join the community in prayer. We're also moving the weekly check-ins. So there had been some ongoing weekly check-ins happening with Chris and other members of the community. And right now we're trying to find the best time that works for everybody. So on Mondays, email, and if it's not Monday, it might come out on Tuesday. But the weekly email that you should receive early in the week will include a link to a doodle poll. It's just a poll for you to basically enter your preference for a weekly check-in time. So if you want your preference to be considered, do link on the doodle link and let your preference be known. We also wanted to thank everybody for their feedback on the Sunday service format. We are working on moving toward a service on WebEx. It's another video meeting service. We're just taking pains to make sure that it's as secure and convenient as possible for everybody, as well as keeping those features, that add to interactivity and our ability to see each other and hear from each other in real time. So that should be coming around mid-July. We'll keep you posted. And we're also keeping an eye on the government guidelines and regulations on meeting in person again. So as soon as we hear a little bit of more determination on that end, we'll definitely update you guys, and we'll work toward meeting in person as soon as it's safe. Okay, so for any other announcements, be sure to check out the weekly email. Like I said, that comes out Monday or Tuesday. And if you don't receive those emails, definitely reach out to chris@oaklifechurch.com to be added to the list. And usually after the announcements, we have our couch convos. But since we're not at church and you may not even be on a couch, let's just take this time to do this new and exciting method of couch convos, which includes, of course, the individual hug. So as you hug yourself, think about how this would be the opportunity we'd be taking to hug those at our church and our friends and loved ones. Share how you're doing with maybe your roommate or your spouse or partner, and also think about how the church can help combat injustice. So how's that for an easy prompt? How can the church help combat injustice? So maybe, like I said, turn to your spouse, roommate, friend, and discuss this question. Or, of course, you can always text somebody. Or just think about it as we prepare to start today's service. All right, Oak Life, like I said, I miss you, and I hope you remain well. Reach out if you're ever in Temescal, and I hope to see you all very soon.
Hey, good morning, Oak Life. My name is Chris. We are glad you're here, however you're joining us. If you are joining and checking in and chatting live with us on YouTube or at a later date, thanks for leaning into community in this time. And there's a lot going on right now, and I hope wherever you're at, that we can have some community together, that we can be together. And even as a church, it seems like every week it's kind of a fluid situation. And the good thing is I sincerely have felt and sensed and seen God with us and leading us and holding us together. So thank you, everyone who's showed that to me. Today's sermon is something that I hadn't planned on sharing or speaking a few weeks ago, but it's something that I think I feel very strongly about, that it needs to be said and that we need to hear. And so I don't often do this, but I want to share with you the title of my sermon. It's actually the longest title I've ever had, as a way to introduce today. The title of the sermon is called "The Good News of the Apocalypse and the Invitation of This Moment." a sermon on the history of racism in the American church. My hope today is to offer some context and maybe some framework for what it means to be church in this moment, in these times. The topic will be heavy. I'm going to be talking about the history of racism and the church's role in that. And I know that that's heavy and this is a process. I don't have all the answers. And I also soberly am aware of my position and privilege within this. But what I want to do is to kind of lay the scene, to reveal how we got here, and hopefully open the door for lament and repentance and healing, and ultimately what I believe is the invitation before us. So today I'd like to share about the word apocalypse and the word kairos, both traditions, ways of thinking and moving. And between that, I'm going to share an overview of roughly 600 years of church history, kind of a bird's eye view to get an awareness, a common understanding of where we are and where we've been. And I hope this sermon is challenging and eye-opening, even if it's a little hard. And so before I start, just to share a couple of sources a couple of voices that inform the data of this sermon. 2 books, The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby, and then second, Unsettling Truths by Mark Charles and Soong-Chan. And also I'm going to go through some data, some history timeline, and a pastor named Phil Wood helped draft that. So the apocalypse. It sort of feels like we're in the end of the world, doesn't it? If not this week, maybe it did more last week, but who knows what next week will bring. It seems like institutions are failing. There's a global pandemic. There's societal unrest, unlike what most of us have ever seen in our lives. And I would say, yes, we are living through an apocalypse, absolutely, but probably not the kind that you're thinking of. Without getting into too much detail, the popular usage of the word apocalypse in America, in the American zeitgeist, and the American Christian zeitgeist, is a relatively new thing for the historic church. In the 1800s, a pastor from Ireland named John Darby developed a framework of theology called dispensationalism as a way to see history. And it essentially says that history is broken up into these different sections, and they were kind of preordained. And the Bible is kind of like a treasure map in which we see where we are now when we read the times. And even though the books were written thousands of years, they're talking about our politicians today. And I don't mean to say that that's not all true, though I don't really understand it or buy into it. These are the ideas that gave us Left Behind and so forth. And that's not what apocalypse is in the biblical tradition. It's not a treasure map. It's not a moment where all of history ends. Apocalypse in Greek translates to the word unveiling or revelation or revealing. It's essentially a moment when the lights are turned on to a room that has a mess, turned on to a room where there are things you didn't know were there or you were hiding from or ignoring. Often there is, in terms of apocalypse, there is some sort of cataclysm or disruption, but then some sort of life is revealed and unveiled. Often an apocalypse brings about an unveiling of injustice, which is what we're seeing now. This pandemic has gotten us to question what's important and what's not important and see reality as for what it is in a way that we haven't in a long time. And we're seeing the racial disparities in communities of color who have been disproportionately affected by the disease for a whole slew of reasons, which are historic and current and need to be looked at and addressed and acknowledged. And so this is what an apocalypse is, a moment of divine disruption, which points us to deeper truths and reality, and hopefully brings us to something good on the other side of it. And so I'd like to show you a moment in the scriptures where Jesus has an apocalyptic moment. This comes from the Gospel of Matthew, and it's chapter 24. I'm going to put it on the screen. This is the only slide I have for us today, but I thought it'd be good to have the scripture on the screen so we could read it together, or you could follow along. It's Matthew 24, and in this moment, Jesus is with his disciples, and he's towards the end of his life. There's heightened anxiety all around. There's talks of revolution. There's talks of the government coming to get Jesus. In a matter of moments, he would be taken before government leaders and executed at the hands of the police state. And so he has these conversations just before that with his disciples. Matthew 24, 1-8. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, so he's leaving the temple, this massive structure that represents economic and religious institutions and power. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming I'm the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. It's still out there. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Birth pains. I love Jesus's framework in this moment because the disciples want a specific time. They want to know what's going to happen next. And Jesus is saying, no. The things, the chaos of this moment, the pain of now, yes, it's real, but it's going to bring new life. The tomorrow ahead will be different because of these things happening. And so Jesus sees these major disruptions as birth pains, painful moments, chaotic moments, moments that also, though, birth new life and shed light on injustice. And I think that's what we're in right now. A great unveiling is happening before us. The lights are being turned on and we're seeing what was there all along. And the question is, will we allow the pain that we're seeing to transform us? Will we take it seriously? And I think the answer to that should be yes. I hope it's yes. Let us listen to this moment. Let us see the good news of the apocalypse in this moment. See, I think that the last few weeks, we're waking up to systemic racism, to its scale of destruction and its sheer evilness. The murder of George Floyd is a match that has lit a fire and is revealing centuries of darkness and millions of painful stories. Will we pay attention? Will we allow this moment to change everything, to disrupt everything? Can we hear the good news of the apocalypse? I think as a church, as people who follow Jesus, we have to, as the lights are being turned on, look at what's there. The depths of white supremacy's tentacles tangling themselves up within our church, and the church's culpability and maybe even primary role historically in fueling that evil fire. So I want to now take some time, and there's no way I can cover everything, but I want to acknowledge some points in church history that we have to repent of, that we have to look at and feel anguish inside of us. Because it's like we're in this current, we're in this flow, and part of that current are these things. And if we don't acknowledge them, if we don't repent of them, if we don't grieve them, if we don't change, we'll just be swept along. And so here is a brief history of racism in America and the church's role. I think one of the starting points you can go to is what's called the doctrine of discovery, which is a series of papal edicts or papal bulls, like words from on high from the Pope that would be considered words from God's self. And in this time, there was no Protestant or a Catholic church split. It's just the Pope, and the Pope speaks on behalf of God. And these edicts were things that you would have to follow. These were the words, the message from God. So in 1452, Dum Diversas, granted permission to the King of Portugal to, in quotes, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Muslims and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his faith for their use and profit. Essentially, the Pope is saying is it's from God. We have permission, and it's a good thing to go enslave and pillage all those people over there, all pagan people, into perpetual slavery. And in 1454, a couple years later, the Romanus Pontifex allowed European Catholic nations to expand their dominion over discovered land with enslavement of native pagans, which meant the transcontinental slavery was starting. This practice of moving people as goods, Portugal being at the forefront at this point, and it was seen as just and lawful and from God. And the Pope is quoted as saying, this is a good thing because we can save them, in a sense. The salvation of all, the Pope wanted this for the salvation of all, that we may bring the sheep entrusted to him by God into a single divine fold, and may acquire for them the reward of eternal felicity and obtain pardon for their souls. So this decree and the practice, and you could say that what we would call, or not we would call this, but what they would call evangelism in this time was a matter of invasion, of domination, of enslavement to bring the pagan non-Europeans into the fold. These were the official statements of the church leader, which created a theological imagination that began the slave trade. Chattel slavery was characterized as Christian, seen as an act of worship, and there are stories of people tithing African slaves to the church as worship. The final of the three that forms the doctrine of discovery is 1493, the Inter Caetera. And this allowed Christopher Columbus and others to be sanctioned to overthrow the barbarous nations, enslaving them with the hopes of bringing them to the new faith, to their faith. Together, again, these formed what's known as the doctrine of discovery. The church intentionally issued this and created the rational basis and theological imagination that made slavery, domination, and oppression and colonization a reality. The church literally imagined it and decreed it. And Europeans, white Europeans, and their faith was declared superior to all others to the degree that all others could be enslaved in the name of God and as an act of grace to bring them into the fold. And then you go into the colonial era, where nations are setting up colonies all over the place. And there's good data that suggests that the indigenous African church, this is the moment where the African church stopped growing, because there was a local Ethiopian church, there was the Coptic church, and it was spreading in its own indigenous way. And when colonization happened, they introduced Western European Christianity and stunted the growth of the indigenous Christians. And so you have this stuff happening all over the place. And as the slave trade is beginning, you see that it's Christians a part of this. In 1619, a Dutch trading ship brought back 20 slaves to colonial Virginia for the first time. They were stolen from the Portuguese on a ship called St. John the Baptist. The first black slaves in America came on a distinctly Christian ship. In 1667, as the states were beginning to form, the Virginia Assembly passed a law that if somebody got baptized, they couldn't become free. There was an actual conversation happening, like, well, what happens if they become Christians and they start thinking about liberation and freedom and justice? And the decision was that, yes, you can become a Christian, but no, you cannot become free. And to be on the assembly that decided these things, you had to be an Anglican white man in good standing with the church. This was 100 years before America formed officially. Then the Virginia Assembly, after that, subsequently passed a law in 1691 creating the first rights of white people. That's the first. And it's, in a sense, parsing out, as you have multiple groups of white people living in one place in different colonies, there's now a need to differentiate those white folks, those Europeans, in their own diversity from the slaves. And so you start this construct, this fake construct of white and black. And so you can move forward through the American Revolution, which was also a subsequently parallel time of what's considered great spiritual revival. There were these mass gatherings, mass worship services happening. But even in those places, as there is the Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening, the integration isn't a reality. Black Christians were allowed to worship together, but not usually with the masses. And some of the most prominent leaders in this time, George Whitefield, a famous Anglican revivalist who started out somewhat ambivalent about slavery when he saw how good it was for his pocketbook and his business, his nonprofit business. He had slaves. He then eventually became an advocate of it towards his own state in Georgia, saying that the state needs slaves to flourish. Jonathan Edwards, one of the most prominent American theologians, somebody who I vehemently disagree with theologically on many things, but nonetheless a very famous American theologian, influential in Puritan theology and what a lot of American Christianity is and believes in, owned slaves and believed that black people were inferior and made less in the image of God than white folks. Abhorrent. These things, it's hard to imagine. The Southern Baptist Church, this is a piece of history that's worth noting. The largest evangelical denomination in America today was formed so that Southern Baptists in the South, who were Baptist, could maintain the practice of slavery. See, what was happening is in Baptist polity, each church is its own autonomous organization. So they don't have a hierarchy above them. But what they do is they'll organize networks or like alliances. And that way they can rally together resources for a humanitarian project or a missionary project. And so what ended up happening is you have some missionaries being sent out to places like Africa, and back home they owned slaves. Do you see the moral hypocrisy there? And so some in the North said, we're not cool with that. And so the Southern Baptists said, okay, well, we're not changing, and formed a denomination, which is now, again, the largest evangelical denomination in America. A massive institution, like literally billions of dollars still today. And they've acknowledged this. I want to give them credit. But it gives you a window into how deeply rooted the church is in perpetuating systems of white supremacy, slavery, and racism. And you have all of these Christians who become leaders in their communities and influence how our nation is founded. And I think you can point to things like the 3/5 clause. They could thread that to all this. You can go to the founding documents, which basically acknowledge slavery, have some implications for it, but are undoubtedly pro-slavery documents. At this time, I just want to acknowledge, I'm doing like the bird's eye view data, but we're talking about a pure evil. We're talking about human anguish that is at a scale which is unspeakable. Chattel slavery meant people were property. At this time, there were more than 600,000 interstate slaves. And as slave sales, so as sales were made between states, there were roughly 600,000. About a quarter of those broke up marriages. 50% of them broke up families. Children under 13 were being sold from their parents. And you can imagine the heinous, evil activity that they were subject to. Subhuman, absolute, disgusting, evil, vile. And in those times, the American church and Christians, white Christians, largely turned a blind eye. There were some abolitionists in the North and popping up here and there, but by and large, the majority turned a blind eye because it benefited them economically. It was uncomfortable to deal with, and the status quo was just easier. So you have all these things happening. Then you go to the Second Great Awakening. Y'all with me? This is stuff we need to say. We need to acknowledge. We go to the Second Great Awakening, and you have more revivals happening and more Pentecostal expression. But in there, you still see some of these things. Charles Finney, a revival leader and the president of Oberlin College, segregated Black worshipers and wouldn't let Black folks hold office in the church. Over and over, the church compromised its prophetic voice and gave into the system of slavery and white supremacy. You go to the Civil War, 650 to 850,000 people died fighting over slavery. And no, it was not about states' rights, because the states' rights that they were fighting for were the right to own slaves. And this time you have all these conversations between clergy and pastors, like arguing about if slavery is okay. And so some people even say that the Civil War, its roots were theology. Thank God, terrible theology was destroyed and disrupted. It's still there, but it needs to be destroyed and killed and sent back to the pit of hell. And so you have all these folks using the Bible, weaponizing the Bible in a way that goes against everything that God is about. The Civil War is fought, and then you go into this period of Reconstruction. But what ends up happening is slavery, racism, systemic institutional racism just takes on another form, in the form of Jim Crow. And you have laws saying Black folks can't live here, can't go out at night. You have laws against interracial marriage, and all these things that were structured to keep Black folks oppressed were backed up by the threat of death, by lynchings, which were public, accepted forms of mob justice, which were, again, another evil. These things of torture and hanging in the public with no trial. We have cases and documentation that there were thousands of them. And it was a spectacle. And often it would be held in Sunday afternoon after church so that Christians could go worship and then join the thousands of people at these public lynchings. And the church largely didn't stop it. And this time you have the first Black Catholic priest who had to go to Europe, had to go to Rome to get his education, to then come back and serve in America. And it infuriated many white Christians. In 1922, you have the Azusa Street Revival, which is the moment where many of the charismatic churches and tradition denominations that are popular today were birthed in Southern California, Los Angeles, where it was led by a Black man named William J. Seymour, who gathered what is one of the most multi-ethnic worship revivals in the history of the world. And though that happened, you have people from all walks of life worshiping for days on end. William J. Seymour was not allowed to get his Bible education in a classroom, but had to sit in the hallway outside because he's Black. One of his mentors called these revivals disgustingly similar to Southern darky camp meetings. Because of the lynchings and the pressure in the South, many African Americans flee and go to other places in the country only to be subject to similar laws and prejudices in those new communities. After World War II, the GI Bill gave veterans all kinds of benefits: loans to buy homes, scholarships, grants for college, healthcare coverage, all that stuff, which arguably created the American middle class. But Black soldiers got nothing. This created the middle class, the wealth that would then be passed upon generation to generation amongst the white community, and the Black community was left out. Not only were they facing segregation and redlining, but a lack of resources altogether. And as the civil rights movement happens and social unrest begins, white flight happens. The white community disinvests from the inner city, leaving the tax base gone. So resources like schools and healthcare were suffering. And the white community leaves it altogether and goes to comfy suburbs. And I would argue and point out that the church benefited from that. The white church benefited from that. This is where mega churches start to pop up, like country club churches in the burbs. And so in the civil rights movement, there is some societal unrest, but the church largely is against it. Dr. King and others, people of faith, yes, they were Christians, Black Christians, led an important, one of the most significant movements in our nation's history. But did you know that very few Christians altogether supported, especially white Christians? Billy Graham himself, who would I would say is like the most prominent evangelical, influential evangelical of the last 100 years, openly opposed the civil rights movement, saying that the race issue is a sin issue. It's an interpersonal thing between us and people, and we have to work on that. So he wasn't interested in systemic issues, even though he was quite vocal about other systemic issues like communism, prayer in schools, etc. He actually told Dr. King to put on the brakes, to stop being distracted, because this is not a main issue. This is a secondary issue. A very small minority of Christians did march in the civil rights movement, but most largely were concerned by it. They were scared by it. They thought it was uncomfortable. And so after the Watts uprising, where 30 people were killed, Billy Graham gave a speech called Rioting and Righteousness, which led to the language of law and order. And as schools were desegregated, white communities often formed private schools, keeping those resources in their community. There's this concern of societal unrest and the disruption from the civil rights movement. And Billy Graham would advise Richard Nixon, our president, and the language of rioting and righteousness offered Nixon a language and a platform to maintain the white evangelical vote. He got 68% of it in his first term and 84% of it in his second term. And one of the refrains he used all the time was law and order. Sound familiar? This was offered to him by Billy Graham in a sense. And so you have this quote, H.R. Haldeman, a Nixon advisor, said, "The whole problem is really the blacks." This is a presidential advisor. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. And so this is what law and order politics did. You have the moral majority happening where people are valuing family values and basically white suburban values. Meanwhile, there is a police state in the inner cities and the black communities. And Nixon said, he's quoted saying, "The seeds of anarchy were sowed by clergymen, educators, and civil rights leaders. I pledge to you, we shall have law and order in the U.S." And so this is what launches what's called the new Jim Crow era, which is an increasingly punitive justice system, which disproportionately affects people of color and specifically the black community. There's a crisis of mass incarceration that forms where we are 5% of the world's population, but 25% of incarcerated persons. There's harsher sentencing and harsher financial burdens on the black community. And there's this movement to privatize prisons. And so there is money to be made by policing vulnerable communities. And so the inner city ramps up its militarization of the police force. And some have called this the new lynching, the school to prison pipeline. Why all these laws? Why do we begin all these things? Well, it's because what started back in Rome and what morphed into slavery and then the Jim Crow became something else. Racism put on a different mask. Systemic racism put on a different mask. And largely speaking, the church has been silent to it. And even recently, this is not like the civil rights movement feels like a long time ago, but no, this is these evidences of these things are everywhere. Bob Jones University, a prominent Christian university, banned its students from interracial dating all the way up until 2008. 2008, it's 12 years ago. All these ideas have morphed and grown over time. And often Christianity was complicit and benefited in it, especially white Christianity. Today, what we see is that the ripples, the context, the momentum that we're in can't be denied. It just can't. Today, we're seeing the lights turning on to all this. CNN last week gave the stat that the average net worth of a white family in America is $171,000. And for the average black family in America, it's $17,000. 10 times less. 1,252 unarmed black men have been killed by police since 2015. And so you either have to look at this and say there is a historic systemic, cultural systems, legal systems, religious systems that are oppressing a group of people, or they're just inferior. And that's not true. That's wrong and abhorrent. And it goes against the deepest tenets of Christianity. Something like 80% of evangelicals, white evangelicals, support our current president. And I've heard stats that that's decreasing, and I really hope it is. Because it was last week where our president tear gassed a group of protesters to have a photo op at a church holding a Bible talking about law and order. I was so pissed off. And you see how this is threaded. It's not just a dog whistle, it's a clear message. I'm the president who will maintain your safety, will maintain the status quo, and I back it up with the Bible, weaponizing the sacred text which points us to divine love. No, damn that. Do you see this? Is this apocalyptic moment turning the lights on for you? I mean, for many of our Black family members, this isn't news. So what do we do? Well, I think we have to lament. We have to stop running from this. We have to let it air out. We have to hear the pain, hear the stories. We have to challenge institutions. We have to tear down institutions. We have to reform institutions. We have to do all of that work in our own hearts. We have to repent personally. I can say for myself, I've always tried to be anti-racist, but I think I've probably chosen what's comfortable most of the time. And so for that, I apologize and I repent. I think as a church, as a community here, as a global church, I think there is an invitation that this apocalyptic moment has some good news to it. And so that's where I want to introduce this other word, kairos. Kairos is the Greek word which means appointed time. It's like a divine moment, a moment where you're syncing up with what God is doing. And what I believe God is doing right now is shedding light on injustice. If you look at the prophets over and over, they are God's critique against societies and communities that start to oppress the poor and overlook it altogether. And the prophets call it out. They cry for justice and mercy, and they say, who cares if you worship God with songs and money? While people are suffering, all that stuff is vile to me, is what God says. Worship is justice, bringing about a better tomorrow for everybody where people can thrive and love and live. That's what it means to worship God, according to the prophets. And so I think we're in a moment of divine critique. And the kairos message in this moment, the divine moment, would be to sync up with what God is doing, to say yes to the invitation, to reflect, to lament, so that we can build a better tomorrow, so that there can be new life in the midst of these birth pains. Yes, there is pain and grief, some of it that I can't ever understand. And my hope is that we'll try, that we'll follow what God is doing in this moment to bring about something new. So the question I have for us is, are we listening to the good news of the apocalypse? What is the divine invitation for you, for us in this moment? What is God leading you to do in response? Maybe it is to demonstrate. Maybe it is to go into office. Maybe it is to talk to a family member. Maybe it is to just rest and grieve and seek healing. I know that I can't know most of this. I can't know what it's like for many of us. But I deeply, in the depths of my soul, believe that God does. That God is with you. So what is the divine invitation for us in this moment? Maybe it's to rest. Maybe it's been so crazy and we just need to rest. And I hope we rest, but I hope we don't give up. I believe there's an invitation for each of us to walk the path of love with God, to be fueled by love above all else. As this moment exposes division and pain that goes deeper than we can imagine, may we unearth it, uproot it, heal it, hold it. May our institutions that are built on the backs of others be torn down like Jesus said the temple would be. And may it be rebuilt like the body, the new temple, the people of Jesus. May it be rebuilt as something that lasts and holds value beyond this moment. A new community, a new world out of the ashes that embraces those who have been marginalized, that seeks justice in all our systems and brings about shalom. Friends, the apocalypse is happening, and I think it's good news. May this be a kairos moment. And as much as the church has been a major primary role, it's also been a major primary role in tearing down unjust systems. And we got to acknowledge the first one to get to the latter. I've seen over and over and over again the church's capacity for healing, to bring goodness, to feed the hungry, to speak out on behalf of the silent, those who have been silenced. I hope that what's underneath it for all of us is love for ourselves, for our neighbors, and for God. And so I'd like to close with a quote from activist, author, Professor Bell Hooks, who we used on our message to our leaders from our leadership team to the church this week. I think these words echo the sentiment of Paul and his framework for love too. May we find the transformative power of love, that is the foundation for all meaningful social change. Oak Life, let us continue to walk the path of love together. And in the midst of these birth pains, may we hold one another. May we hold the pain and trust that God is bringing something new just around the corner. Amen.
Falling down upon our knees, sharing now in common shame. We have sought security, not the cross that bears your name. Fences guard our hearts and homes, comfort sings a siren tune. We're a valley of dry bones, lead us back to life in you. Lord, we fall upon our knees. We have shunned the weak and poor. Worship beauty, courted kings, and the things their gold affords. Prayed for those we'd like to know. Favor sings a silent tune. We've become a talent show. Lead us back to life in you. the blind to see. We have blinded them again with our man-made laws and creeds, eager, ready to condemn. Now we plead before your throne. Power sings a siren tune. We've been throwing heavy stones. Lead us back to life in you. Lead us back. Lead us back. Lead us back to life in you. We're a valley of dry bones. Lead us back to life in you. We've become a talent show. Lead us back to life in you. We've been throwing heavy stones. Lead us back to life in you.
Oak Life, thank you for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to this service through songs or editing or announcements or in any other way. Thank you for being with us in this. As we close, I'd like to share the benediction, which has been our pandemic benediction. And I hope you know that you're loved, know that you're not alone. So, Oak Life, who can separate us from the love of God? Can troubles or hardships, persecution, hunger, poverty, danger, death, or pandemics? The answer is nothing, absolutely nothing. No matter what comes our way, we have overwhelming victory through God who loved us and gave everything for us. So, Oak Life, go into the coming week with hope and joy, confident in the knowledge that God's love goes with you. God of love, be with us now as we go forth to love and serve the world, either in person or from a distance. Amen. Okay, love you all, and see you online some point this week or next week. Have a great Sunday afternoon, and thanks for being in this with us.
Is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness.
I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only lean on Jesus'
name. On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand.
All other ground is sinking sand. When darkness tries to hide his face,
I rest on his unchanging grace.
And every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid
Amen.